Hi, I'm Chris Converse, and welcome to part 2 of this 3-part series on creating a 3D product box. In this episode, we'll add a sprite sheet graphic to the sides of our product box, then position the background graphic to match the artwork to the corresponding sides. And if you were following along with me in part 1, we're going to continue working inside of the same exercise files. So back in our text editor, we ended here by creating the top, left, and front panels of our box. Now we're going to add a background graphic into all of these individual divs. So in our CSS file, let's come back to our product space box space div rule, and let's add a background graphic to all of these divs. So after border, let's come in here and add a background property. We're going to use a background graphic, so we'll type URL, put in our parentheses. Inside of the parentheses, we'll type images / box_design.jpg. Then outside of the parentheses, we'll add a no repeat property. Add a semicolon, save your CSS, go back to the browser and hit reload, and you'll now see that that graphic is being applied to all 3 sides. And so now that we've assigned the background image, next we need to set the background size. Now the graphic is 400 pixels wide by 550 pixels high. So this is the size that we'll use inside of our CSS. Then we'll reposition the background on each cube face to make use of each individual graphic in the sprite sheet. It's also worth mentioning that the top graphic is 200 pixels wide by 200 pixels high, and the sides are 200 pixels wide by 350 pixels high. And this is where we got the numbers for the dimensions in part 1. So back in our CSS file, after the background property, let's hit a return and let's put in a background size. So background-size, we're going to set this to 400 pixels for the width, then a space, then 550 pixels for the height. So now with that in place, let's get our cursor inside of the CSS that targets the product box top. After the transform property, let's come in here and add a background position. So background-position, space. For the X position, we're going to set this to -200 pixels, then a space, and then 0 for the Y position. Save your CSS, go back to the browser. You'll now see that we can see the top of the product box here with the logo and the 4 rules coming off of it. Now let's come back to our CSS. Let's go into the product box front rule. Let's add a background position here. Background-position. For the X, we're going to set this to -200 pixels, then a space, then we're going to set the Y to -200 pixels. Then I'll use my cursor and arrow down inside of the product box left rule. We'll add background position here as well, and we're going to set this to 0 on the X, space, -200 on the Y. Add a semicolon, save your CSS, and we'll now see each of the 3 individual graphics from the sprite sheet are being placed on their proper corresponding sides. Now the last thing we'll want to do before we go back to the HTML in the next part is we want to remove those borders and then make some slight adjustments. So first let's scroll up in the CSS. Let's find the product space dot box. Let's come in here and remove that blue border. We can see that showing up in the browser right over here. Let's remove that. And then in the product box div rule, let's come in here and remove the border there as well. Let's hit save and go back to the browser. Now there's one last thing I want to take care of, and that is in some browsers you might see a really light seam showing up here. This is the edge of the individual graphics. So what we're going to do to get rid of this is we're going to go back to the CSS, and for the front and left properties, instead of setting translate Z to 100 pixels, let's come in here and simply set this to 99 pixels. This will give us basically a 1 pixel overlap to hide those seams. So with those in place, let's hit save, go back to the browser, reload, and we'll now see that those seams are much less obvious. And so now we have our 3D product box using a sprite sheet graphic in CSS, and this concludes part 2 of this 3-part series. So join me in part 3 where we'll remove the HTML from the sides, then we'll scale and position the 3D box to fit within a web layout.